Avi Douglen, which almost doesn't need introduction, actually. And he's going to talk about the threats to our community. So, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you all. I really am very, very excited to be here. Honored to be part of the first threat modeling conference. Very excited because I wasn't even sure until last week if I would even have a flight out of Israel to make it here. But I'm here. I'm glad. I won't say I'm okay, but I am safe. So I'm glad. Really excited to be here. Now, this is not a typical security talk. I mean, it is a security talk, but it's not about security. It's about the security community. And I think that the security community, compared to other communities, is uniquely positioned to use our security skills, our analytical techniques, our threat modeling to apply it to the fabric of the community itself. And we can use this to build a better, safer, more secure community. Brooke already started with a little bit of, is this working? There we go. Brooke already started with a little bit of history. I'm going to go a little bit further back, all the way to 1999. I'm sure some of the folks will remember this. A paper from a couple of folks working at Microsoft, Lauren and Prerit, came out with a paper titled "The Threats to Our Products." And they laid out a structured framework that we came to know and love as threat modeling, how to apply this to a software process. Right? They also introduced the STRIDE framework, which some people love, some people love to hate. But we're actually going to use this because it's a very useful tool to explain how to find these threats. So what I want to do in this talk, I'm going to want to take threat modeling, which everybody here knows and loves, and apply this to the community with one of the most complex systems there are, right? We could all threat model anything, right? Even the most complex social systems such as a community, right? Who thinks community is important, right? Community is important. But it doesn't just happen. People spend a lot of time and effort working to build the community. So I want, as part of the system that we're building, I want us to be using threat modeling to build the more secure community. Now, I want to preface this talk with saying, this is not my expertise. I'm barely competent with threat modeling, definitely not with social issues. I'm a complete introvert nerd, I don't know anything. A typical techie, right? There are people who are experts in this field, but I want to share, in true community sense, I want to share what I have been learning, still am learning. Hopefully I won't be stating too much of the obvious. So a little bit of the intro to myself. Why is this not working? There we go. A little bit of intro to myself. My name is Avi Douglen. I find my internet face bouncing around. Some of my contact details. It really is time to get rid of Twitter. Fed up with that. My pronouns. I have 5 or 6 kids at home, depending how you count them. I'll explain later. In my day job, I do software security consulting or product security consulting at a small boutique called Bounce Security. But I am also very active in a lot of different communities, especially in professional communities. First and foremost is OWASP. I am one of the, seriously, this is not working. One of the leaders of the OWASP Israel chapter, okay? And I am currently on the board of directors of OWASP as well. I don't know yet if I'm going to continue for the next term. Elections are ongoing, so if you are an OWASP member and you haven't voted yet, please go ahead and vote for me right now. I'll wait. Go ahead, do it. I'm also a community moderator on Security Stack Exchange. If you're not familiar with that, it's exactly like Stack Overflow. It's literally part of their family of sites, but around security. So this is a great resource, and a massive internet community has actually built up around this site before Stack Exchange managed to kill it off. I'm also one of the founding members of the TM Connect community, as has been mentioned here a few times. And like several of the other speakers, I'm one of the co-authors of the Threat Modeling Manifesto. Now, everybody here knows threat modeling. Everybody has their own approach to threat modeling. For me, one of the most important aspects of threat modeling is to get outside of our own head, to find our own implicit assumptions, to find our own internal biases, and be able to get outside of that and focus on what really matters. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this diagram of a World War II bomber. Everybody likes to use this. And everybody has a different perspective on what this actually means. If you're not familiar with it, going back to World War II, the Allied effort was super important. Huge amounts of anti-aircraft fire going on. 25% of bombers never actually came back. So what do they do? They want to protect the bombers. What do? They put more armor on. Now, you can't put armor on the entire plane. That simply doesn't work. It's like flying a tank, right? Too slow, too heavy, too expensive, one of the most important things. So what do? They say, okay, we're going to, like good engineers, we're going to start by collecting data. We're going to start looking at the planes that we have, right? And look at where there are bullet holes, where there's damage, and we'll put our extra armor on those areas. Now this makes perfect sense until along came a statistician by the name of Abraham Vogt. Apropos of nothing, he was a Holocaust survivor, and a refugee actually, and he pointed out that those engineers were falling into a really common trap known as survivor's bias. They were only looking at the planes that came back. They didn't even notice that what they really cared about was getting the planes to come back. The ones they were looking at already did that, right? Damage, not a problem. We'll fix those up, throw out a new crew, and send it back out. But they weren't even looking at the planes that didn't make it, that didn't survive, when that was the one thing they really cared about. The one thing that was so important for them was to get the planes to survive long enough to be able to land. Then they'll worry about fixing it. In the same way, it's very important for us to find those cognitive biases, to be aware of them, to find our assumptions, and focus on what really matters. As has been said many times, everybody knows threat modeling is for everyone, right? Who should be threat modeling? You should be threat modeling. You should be threat modeling. You don't need to worry about it. But everybody involved in the system needs to be threat modeling, right? It's literally the theme of the conference, right? It's literally the theme of the conference. But I want to take a small pivot on threat modeling is for everyone. I want to talk about threat modeling is about everyone. Right? Threat modeling is about everyone because the system we're talking about is community. Community is people. Right? So let's talk about community. Right? What even is a community? If we're talking about threat modeling a community, we kind of have to have a better idea, a better model of what a community even is. We all kind of feel that, right? Well, it turns out that the definition of community actually includes this idea of this feeling. Seriously. Switching. This idea of a feeling, right? You choose to be part of the community. You have this connection with the rest of the community. Now, it might be by choice. It might be because you have common attitudes, interests, goals. You're trying to do something. It might be because you have common characteristics, right? It might be the redheaded community or the LGBTQ community, right? Or the Jewish community, right? There's a lot of different kinds of communities out there. It might be localized. It might be all the citizens of a city banding together as a single community to fight off the Dothraki horde. In some ways, the Dothraki horde themselves are also kind of weird and violent community, but they are a community. Hopefully, whatever communities you might be part of, they won't be quite as violent as that. Hopefully, it'll be more like something a bit more peaceful, a lot more pleasant, right? I might have gone with 100 Acre Wood, but that might have been a bit too on the nose for me. Ideally, you'll get to a place where your community is actually more of a good place, right? And you get to talk about what T.M. Scanlon calls contractualism. And you can imagine a group of reasonable people getting together to decide on the rules of a new society, a new kind of society. Like, for example, if your Uber driver talks to you, the ride should be free, right? But anyone can veto any rule that they think is unfair. And then you have basically society or a community that has an agreed upon set of rules that people feel are fair. Every community will have different rules, but everyone in the community is expected to follow those rules, whatever they happen to be in that space. Right? Everyone in the community is there to help each other do the thing, whatever that thing is, right? Those common goals. Whatever it is, the threat modeling community, we want to help each other learn to be better at threat modeling. Whatever that goal is, everyone is there to do, we're all here to do what we're all here to do. Everyone part of the community, actually everyone contributes. Everyone is expected to be a useful member of that community, and everyone is important. There are no community members that don't count. That's not such a thing. So if we're trying to model a community, right, a DFD, right, it won't work. We're not looking for data flows. We're actually looking for value flows, right? Value flows, who contributes to the community, who benefits from those contributions, right? What are the power dynamics in that community? Because there always are power dynamics, right? I want to take a quick example of a community. I'm going to use the OWASP community because I happen to know it very well. I don't know how many of you know, but last month the OWASP board actually got together and put together a really colorful mind map to understand what's important in the community and put a whole bunch of things. And while it's really easy to brainstorm and throw things out there, it doesn't really help us understand how this works and how the community actually works. So I sliced off a bit of that and overlaid it on a Wardley map. Right? Now, a Wardley map is about mapping the value chain, where a data flow diagram will show you how the system works. A Wardley map will show you why it works, right? And we have up here the main users, consumers of the community, the main participants of the community, and we understand that, and we all have a shared vision or shared mission that we're all trying to achieve, and based on that, we have a few objectives, right? And it's all about the user needs. How do these different parts of the system contribute to those user needs? The Wardley map was invented by Simon Wardley as a way to map business strategy, right? And you understand what are the parts of the system that actually contribute. Higher up on the map is more visible user needs. Lower down are the components that contribute to that. And then you can have the x-axis. You have things evolve as motion. Components get more evolved over time and start producing higher order value and then contribute more higher up. And then you can get to see, how which parts of the system need to evolve over time to produce more value, which are the ones that need to be focused on, and you start noticing different patterns, feedback loops, and now we kind of have an idea of what a model of a community might look like, how the community works and why it works, which are the parts that are important. Now, if we're modeling our community as a system, that actually means that the components of the system are the individuals, right? The individuals. And like any system, some components are vulnerable, right? Some don't behave as designed. They don't behave and do what they should be doing. Some are not as supportive of the other parts of the system, of the other individuals in the community. Everyone knows that insider threats are a big, complicated deal, right? We also need to think about community insiders, right? And everyone's familiar with stride. We talk about stride per element. I want to give you a few examples to think about what this might look like if we apply this to the individuals, to the people in the community. Right? Now, it goes without saying, as George Box never actually says, and I tend to misquote him, all threat models are wrong, some are useful. Close to his quote. It's okay, what I'm telling you is wrong, that Wardley map is not comprehensive. The framework that I'm going to be presenting, the examples for stride in a community context are not accurate, and that's okay. What I want to achieve from here is starting to think about these things. The usefulness that I'm looking for is to have this conversation about what those threats might look like. Excuse me. Now, everyone here, I'm sure, is familiar with stride, right? Spoofing, time, repudiation, information exposure, denial of service, elevation, and privileges. Everyone's familiar with that. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth, but I'm actually going to focus more on the right side of this, the attribute that the threats are actually threatening, right? So I'm talking about, like, instead of spoofing, I'd be talking about identity. For tampering, I'd be talking about integrity. For repudiation, we'll be talking about provability. What are the activities that need to be proven in the system? Information disclosure, I'm going to talk about confidentiality, of course, availability for DOS, and for elevation of privileges, we talk about authority. What am I authorized to do? What are you not authorized to do? What can one person do and not another one? And so on. Now, I want to be very clear up front that I'm going to be talking about a lot of triggering concepts. If I make anyone feel uncomfortable, if you feel like you need to step outside, I apologize for that, but please go ahead and do that if that's what you feel like you need to do. Because I want to talk about what spoofing might look like in a community context, right? Because we're talking here about identity. And identity in a real world term, we're not talking about a username in a cookie, right? Identity in a real world term has a lot of different meanings, a lot of different concepts that might be attacked. And the first way is, I'm sure we've all met people like this pretending to be an expert, right? I could get up here on stage and pretend that I'm an expert in this field, and we've all seen those people who like spouting random crap, and they're really not the expert they claim to be. Another form of spoofing would be something like putting your name on somebody else's work, or claiming credit for their idea. A completely different form of attacks on identity in a social context would be misgendering, right? If you consistently misgender somebody, you're basically saying, I don't respect you, I don't care about your identity, I don't care about who you are. Very similar to this would be dead naming, right? Using somebody's pre-transition name. You're not willing to acknowledge their identity of who they are right now. This is an attack on their identity. We could also talk about something that I decided to call, pointless of nothing, to call identity injection. If there's a specific resource dedicated for a certain subset of the community, let's say scholarships for women, and I, a cis white male, say, because I'm actually secretly a woman, inside, right? I should get access to that resource. Well, it's kind of gate crashing, right? Those of you might have heard what happened last month at the Grace Hopper conference, which was supposed to be a celebration of women in tech, and a bunch of completely normative cis white males showed up and say, oh, I'm actually not non-binary. I should get access to the conference. Gate crashing. And this kind of forces us to talk about the good guy scenario, right? A guy who gets up and pretends that they are the good guy, right? Talk about supporting survivors, talk about abuse and situations like that, which just makes me look like I'm the good guy and people should trust me, and leads to opportunities for grooming their next victim. It's literally gotten to the point where somebody literally told me that anytime a middle-aged white guy stands up on stage to talk about abuse, right, it's like kind of a yellow flag. Not so long ago, there was an organization dedicated to helping survivors of child abuse, to preventing child abuse, and the leader of that organization was himself an abuser. This is far too common, right? So this is kind of spoofing who you are as an identity. Next, we talk about tampering, right? And tampering is all about integrity. Integrity has a few of its own different meanings, right? So for example, if you have a professional community, let's take OWASP as an example, and this community gets taken over by a specific commercial vendor, pushing their own narrative, their own commercial interests, well, then you can't really trust very much coming out of that organization, can you? Another form of attack on integrity, if a leader of that community starts pocketing some of the community resources, some of the funds, might be to their own private pocket, might be to a commercial interest which they might be involved in, well, again, nobody's going to trust the integrity of the financial management of that community. Of course, we could talk about integrity of data or of information, and there's a ton of misinformation out there right now, both on the Middle East situation and just in general, so much misinformation, and you can no longer trust the things that you read. A specific example of that would be deepfakes. Remember a few years ago, there was a video of Obama saying a bunch of weird stuff. It was actually that comedian mouthing the words for him, right? You can't trust what you see. And then there's this brand new thing that they introduced called mansplaining. Do you know what mansplaining is? Mansplaining is when a man condescendingly interrupts a woman to explain to her something she already knows. I like to call this conversational man in the middle. And that's the only time I'll use that term. Next up is repudiation, right? And this is about provability. What are the things you want to be able to prove? And this starts by a lack of transparency. If there's a bunch of stuff happening behind closed doors, backroom dealing, it might be for good reasons. But you can't prove that because there's no transparency. There's a complete loss of trust if you don't know what is going on. Then there's gaslighting, right? And there's gaslighting, which is kind of an attack on the victim's relationship with reality, trying to get them to doubt their sense of what is actually going on, right? It's repudiating their perceptions. Right? And a subset of that would be weaponized banter, right? If a guy's hitting on a woman at work and he gets called out by HR, I was like, no, I wasn't serious. You can't take a joke, girl's crazy, right? Trying to have plausible deniability about that. Call it pickup smuggling, right? Trying to repudiate what is actually going on. Another way is just repudiating somebody's experience. Oh, that never happened to you. Show me the scars. Where are all the bodies? Repudiating their reality. And then there's this deliciously terrible term called DARVO, which is a very common abuser tactic when they get called out for doing something wrong. They tend to go on the offensive. They start by denying I did anything wrong, and then attacking the person that called them out and trying to reverse who is the victim and who is the offender. Right? Again, repudiating this reality of what actually happened. Next up, we talk about information disclosure, right? Attacks on secrecy, and I'm going to step a little bit probably on Dr. Kim's talk about privacy, which is a heck of a lot more than just information disclosure, obviously, but in the real world, this comes out in a lot of different ways. For example, outing somebody as gay, outing somebody as trans, outing somebody as left-wing. There's a lot of different forms revealing what they are, which, of course, in the wider term is doxing, right? Putting their personal information online, revealing their secret identity to the world, which, as Tanya said earlier, kind of leads to situations of stalking, right? Which can lead to serious things. I want to talk about one specific scenario about sharing non-consensual photos. If I take a picture of everybody and upload it, some of you might have objections to that. Usually at security conferences, some people object to having the picture online. But an even more insidious form of this is if somebody shares intimate photos with their partner. And after they break up, the partner uploads this to a revenge porn site. Right? There's another form of information disclosure that is not intended. Next up, we talk about denial of service. Right? Denial of service is all about access to the system, right? Access to the functionality, access to the services, access to the community itself. And this will start with something as basic and as simple as simply excluding a specific group of people. No gingers allowed. Nobody with beards, right? Or it could be a lot more subtle, like, oh, everybody is welcome at our conference as long as you have a normative male body, right? This is also a form of exclusion. Right? We could also talk about gatekeeping, right? Prove to me that you're worthy to be here. Oh, I don't mind having women on stage, but I wouldn't want to lower the quality. I've heard this from far too many events. Right?
To be kidding.
All the time. All the time. This is why I would otherwise. I'm all in support of it, but don't want to lower the quality. Oh, you think you're a hacker? Well, how many CVEs do you know? What's your favorite exploit? Right? That's not a gatekeeping. And then the generic form of discrimination, right? Separate rules for different minorities, right? Different random criteria, right? I mentioned earlier about what happened at the Grace Hopper conference, and it got to the point where so many men were gate crashing that the actual women and non-binaries at the conference weren't able to get into a lot of the sessions. There was a career fair that women couldn't get to because all the men were shoving their way in, as tends to happen because we men like shoving our way in, and they simply were overloaded and not able to access that thing. And like with network DOS, there's also a distributed form of DOS known as microaggressions, right? And just like with a network DDoS, right, it's not about one packet, and it might be a stupid, obnoxious comment, which in isolation might not be a big deal, like, oh, are you here with your husband? It's so nice that they let people like you join the team, right? It's by itself, it's so obnoxious, but it's not overall a big deal. But like with the network DDoS, right, it becomes a big deal when you start dealing not with one packet, but 10,000 packets in a second, your system's going to have a problem. If you have to deal with these stupid, annoying, obnoxious, ignorant comments 100 times, 1,000 times, every single day, every day, this takes a massive toll on your internal resources, and they no longer want to participate and contribute because they're simply overwhelmed. Finally, we need to talk about elevation of privilege. Right? This is about authority, what you're allowed to do, consent. Right? We need to talk about consent. And this starts with something like harassment. Harassing people, anytime this person shows up, everybody's got to have a comment. Everybody's got to attack them. Why are you letting her be on stage? Right? Nasty comments all the time. Making complaints about them frivolously. Right? Unwantedly touching somebody, physically having physical contact. A lot of people don't like to be touched, and that's okay. Especially after somebody says, don't touch me no more. Right? And we kind of need to talk about, in this context, we need to talk about violence and assault. But to be completely honest, I don't think I can talk about it in this context without completely trivializing assault and assault survivors, which is really not okay. So I'm going to leave this as kind of a thought exercise, right? To think about. I'm just not going to do that here. But then we need to talk about those power dynamics and people that abuse those power dynamics. Because when people abuse their power and get away with it, they tend to do it over and over again. If a person did it a couple of times, they probably did it 4 or 5 times. And then if they only did it 4 or 5 times and got away with it, they probably did it 40 and 50 times. And if they did 40 and 50 times and got away with it, they tend to get even worse and more, especially when they have a band of loyalists around them, protecting them and saying, hey, he didn't do anything wrong. What do you want from him? Everything is fine. Now, it wouldn't really be a threat modeling talk without talking about countermeasures. Went through STRIDE, and we're going to, and again, it's not complete. It's just a few examples. I want to talk really quickly about a few countermeasures because it starts with, I'm going to freely steal from the Threat Modeling Manifesto, it starts with a culture of fixing problems. If you are in a community that has that culture or are looking to fix those problems, you might be in a good place. If you're not, well, then it's probably a toxic community. And the thing about that is that community is actually based on the individuals, right? And threats to those individuals are a threat to the community. Attacks on the community, attack on my community, is as personal as attacking me. So let's talk really quickly about some countermeasures, because I would categorize these as 4 different groups of countermeasures. Preventive controls. And this starts by simply getting rid of the attackers, the abusers. Get rid of them. And kudos to Black Hat that recently removed somebody like that. Secondly, there's sometimes some social activities you just need to drop. Don't have an open bar at late night parties because at some point somebody's going to do something, somebody's going to feel uncomfortable. Don't have a community meetup at a strip club. Right? Yeah, that happened. That's not going to be comfortable for anybody normal. And with just a little bit of compassion and empathy, you realize that supporting mental health goes a really long way. We also need to talk about detective controls, right? Starting by monitoring, situational awareness. If you see somebody crying in a corner, might be a problem. If there's somebody that consistently gets a lot of complaints about that person, gotta react to that. But to do that, your volunteers need to be the kind of trustworthy people that other people feel comfortable coming to and telling about that. I also want to mention administrative controls like the code of conduct. Yes, this conference has a code of conduct. Look on the website to see it. But also having things written down about what happens and what's supposed to happen, process and policy. And when things go wrong, you follow the incident handling playbook and be consistent about how you apply that. I also want to talk about strategic controls, which can't really just throw it into place, but having a diverse community helps build that up, helps protect everyone in that community, to protect that. And that starts building cultural norms, right? We're a civilized community here, that's not the way we do things, right? And then you start focusing on those shared values, the common goals of the community, and you build stronger bonds which protects the community as a whole. Now, all of these preventive, detective, administrative, strategic controls all rely on one underlying component, which I would call the blue team of community, called allies. Right? I'm going to go through this really quickly because I only have about a minute left. Now 30 seconds, I got a timer. Really quick, because if you want to be an ally, and you should be an ally. If you're not trying to be an ally, you're probably part of the problem. The number one thing allies need to do is to listen. I'm still learning to internalize this, and sometimes I don't do that enough. Allies need to listen, and so why am I still talking, right? Because this is a discussion that needs to happen, and it's not the marginalized that need to be responsible for it. Allies need to speak up, be persistent, keep pushing this. Allies don't need to just listen to the marginalized, they need to help everybody hear them. Be a megaphone for the marginalized. Everyone has some form of inherited power, relative privilege, earned authority. Allies will consistently use these for the good of everyone in the community. Allies publicly make noise to make things happen, and sometimes it's okay to make changes quietly as well. Right? Allies will fight to have all those security controls that we talked about. If you're attending an event, they don't have a code of conduct, make them. You're invited to speak at a conference and everybody looks exactly like me, you retract your talk and leave room for other people. Allies don't do this for cookies, respect, or any kind of moral reward. Allies do this because it's what's right, it's what's fair. And in the cases that things do go wrong, incidents do happen, allies will focus on protecting everybody in the community, harm reduction. Allies will fight to get rid of the people who are known abusers. And if you think that's not really possible, well, Stanford did a study a few years ago about online communities, and it turns out that just 1% of the people in the community are responsible for 3/4 of all the trouble. 75% because of just 1%. Allies consistently try to get better and help each other get better. Allies know when to show up and when to sit down and shut up, and I'm listening to my own advice. Do I got another 45 seconds? All right. As Tanya actually said earlier, allyship has to be intersectional. And by that I mean it cannot be conditional about the people happen to be in your own category, whatever it is. It's not, you don't just check that box of, oh, I have diversity because I did one thing, because there's so many different ways. Now this is not a hierarchy of who gets the most discrimination points, right? It's kind of more of an interlaced matrix of disadvantage. I'm sure most of you know, here in the US, a woman in a job will typically get 80% of what a typical male with the same background in the same role would get. A woman of color in the same role would get 60%, 62 cents on the dollar in that same role with the same background. So it's about all these things coming together. Something else allies do, allies get tired of the constant fight, the constant battle with not much to show for it. Allies make mistakes. I've definitely made my share of mistakes. I made his share of mistakes too. One thing allies don't do is make excuses. Get called out, do better, try harder. And with that, I will leave you, I usually like to leave with takeaways. Instead, I'm going to leave you with 3 calls to action. And number 1, threat model everything, all the time, even complex social systems such as a community. Threat modeling is about everyone, no one left behind. Secure the community by being an ally. Really need to care about these things. And if you do care about it, stop caring and start doing. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks, Avi, for this really great presentation. I have to say that, honestly, personally, I am blind to a lot of this stuff, and seeing it put in the language that I actually speak helps me a lot to put it into place. So, on a personal level, thank you a lot. We won't be having a Q&A because we are a bit out of time. So, just a bit. So, I'll see you guys on the next one. Okay, thanks again, Avi.
Personal note, in the interest of not stealing credit from people, a lot of people, I'm off, still on. A lot of people helped me and educated me, so I don't want to steal credit from them, sharing credit with all the people that did that. And another personal note, in the interest of being an ally, a lot of people asked how to help this situation in Israel. If the mood strikes you and you want to donate, the problem is there's a lot of misinformation and spoofed sites out there. So there's this one site on the screen, giveisrael.org, that actually verifies the various charities to make sure the money is actually going to where it should be going, to the victims and the survivors and their families. So if you want to, feel free. Thank you.